Hello, my sweet doves. If you haven't immediately noticed, I'm not in my usual highly professional bedroom setup. I'm not at home right now, but I wanted to still make content for you all, so this is the background that we're working with today. So for today's video, we're going to be rating Keira Knightley's costumes in the various period dramas that she starred in. We're just going to be doing 2 scores per movie, the historical accuracy score and the style score. I'm not going to combine them. I'm also going to be looking at the dresses out of context because I do know that costume design is very vast. Like, trust me, I know. There's a lot that goes into it. The reason I'm not going to be talking more about the costume design as a whole is because I plan to do individual videos for some of these movies where I will go more in depth with them. So today we're just going to be looking at just the dresses and the outfits that she wears in general. This should come as no surprise to anyone, but Pirates of the Caribbean is not historically accurate just in general. I think the creators or the writers said that they actually loosely placed the first movie somewhere between 1720 and 1750. They didn't really care too much about historical accuracy, but Ali Gemmell on Screen Rant managed to work out the timeline of the franchise and placed the first movie in 1728. So let's use that date to make this easier. Now, I rewatched this movie relatively recently because I was like, I haven't actually watched this movie since elementary school, and I obviously had to rewatch it again for this video. So I did that, and the corset slander was really a lot. First of all, the corset was not popular terminology until the 1800s. The boned corset-like bodice that we see in a lot of period dramas prior to the 1800s is actually called a stays. I don't know if the writers didn't know this or if they just deliberately chose to use the word corset because it's a more popular word in today's lexicon, but yeah, this was no good. But what actually bothered me more than the terminology mix-up or even the tight lacing is just the fact that Keira Knightley's character, Elizabeth Swann, acts like she's never worn a corset before.
I'm told it's the latest fashion in London.
Well, women in London must have learnt not to breathe.
She's literally an adult English woman in the 1720s. Like, what do you mean you don't know how to breathe with the stays on? You would have been wearing a stay since the age of 12. Minus the script issues, the actual costume design does look pretty good. The gold dress that she wears is pretty accurate. It's a robe à la française made with what looks like silk taffeta. I can admit that I don't know too much about historical sewing construction, but it looks fine. I'm not mad about it. I'm convinced that it's the early 18th century, and that's kind of all that I ask for when it comes to historical accuracy in period dramas. The dress that Barbossa gives her is composed of a red-colored silk mantua, and at first glance, the sleeves definitely scream 17th century to me. I tried to scavenge the internet for some gowns that look similar, and only came up with a few examples from the late 1600s. I guess it's all possible in the timeline because Barbossa did acquire this dress from another woman. He doesn't say when, but I guess it could be 40 years old. The only glaring thing is that the skirt of the dress looks to be of a retroussé style, which is when the skirt is looped up in the back. All the gowns I've seen with the skirt style are from the late 1700s. For historical accuracy, I'm giving her outfits a 7 out of 10, just because I can't date this red gown for the life of me. For style, I'm not super obsessed with the dresses. I would give them a 5 out of 10, just because there's been so many period dramas focused on this time period, and these dresses are just nothing to write home about compared to all the other productions. I actually think the red dress is very tacky. One of my Instagram followers actually messaged me and was like, she looks like she's on the cover of one of those bodice ripper romance novels. So that's not really a compliment, at least I think. Okay, so Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice 2005 is actually a very polarizing topic. I've realized in the fashion history enthusiast community, we have one camp that loves the costumes, that thinks even though it's not completely historically accurate, the inaccuracies can be justified, whereas the other camp, 1995 BBC dedicated fans who think that version was so much better than this version because that one was more historically accurate in terms of costume design and in general even stuck to the unflattering trends of the era in the name of historical accuracy. Where do I stand on this case? I actually liked Pride and Prejudice's 2005's costume design. I don't think it was the best. It probably wouldn't even make it on my top 10 costume design, top 15 costume designs ever, but I don't hate it. I've watched a good number of Joe Wright films in my lifetime. I've seen a lot of the director's commentary and behind the scenes footage, and even though I've never met Joe Wright, nor have I ever talked to him, I feel like I understand him as a director when it comes to aesthetics. I think he's very particular about style. In case you didn't know, he actually set his adaptation of Pride and Prejudice in 1790, and this was because he thought Empire line dresses that were popular in the Regency period were too ugly, and so he wanted to push back the time period with it still making sense. The Bennets are also shown to be quite lower status in this adaptation, with Elizabeth frequently getting dirt on her clothes and pigs just wandering in the house. But this is not right. They're actually not as low status as the adaptation might have you believe. In addition, dresses in the early 1790s were relatively full-skirted, so Lizzie is not wearing enough petticoats in this movie for sure. Her dresses all look a little flat. These are just general costuming notes, but let's take a closer look at some of the dresses. This dark green round gown is really pretty, but doesn't really work for historical accuracy. Joanne said that she chose Lizzie's color palette to be earthy because Lizzie is a tomboy who loved the countryside. This is pretty inaccurate to the book as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because it has been a while since I read Pride and Prejudice, but the Bennets are not supposed to be low class. They're actually pretty high class because Mr. Bennet did inherit an estate. You don't inherit an estate if you're low class. That's just not how it works. The problem is that the Bennets failed to save enough money for their daughters' dowries, which made them all less eligible for marriage. Regardless of that fact, Elizabeth Bennet is a gentleman's daughter, and she's actually higher class than the Bingleys, who are from a rich merchant family. What I'm trying to get at is that she should be wearing more fashionable pastel colors. Her father might have less means, but they're not poor. Women who wore darker colors were actually lower class because they had to work every day, and wearing light colors was not practical for them. On a style level, I love this dress. I love a good sweetheart neckline, the crossover bodice, the sheerness of the sleeves, the lace trim. Literally all the girls are wearing white dresses of the same silhouette, but Lizzie's is still clearly the prettiest from these small details. The bodice is actually pretty historically accurate, though I think the crossover situation would be a bit higher in the chest and it would be less of a sweetheart neckline. There's a brief scene of her and Jane getting ready before the ball, and we can see that they're both wearing chemises and transitional stays, which are these short stays that came into fashion in the Regency period. I can't tell if she's actually wearing a stays or a chemise underneath the actual gown, but at least we're supposed to think she did, and that's what matters. Lastly, let's talk about the brown jumper. She wears this sleeveless garment over a long sleeve blouse with a large opening at the neck. This ensemble is pretty good. Jumper dresses were pretty popular in the 1790s through the 1810s. The buttons also modernized the dress a bit more, but overall it goes with that earthy vibe they were trying to do, I guess. Overall, I give Lizzie's wardrobe a 7 out of 10. The ball gown is really carrying the other dresses, but none of them are ugly. They're just not spectacular, but I think that was also the point. I did a whole video looking at Atonement's costume design, so if you're interested in that, it's the first video on my channel, so I would take a look at that after this video. For historical accuracy, I'm giving Keira's looks a 7 out of 10. Cecilia, her character, wears a couple different outfits in this film, the first being this midi flowy blouse ensemble. It's not completely accurate. For instance, women do not mismatch patterns like this, and Joanne actually said in an interview she had trouble creating this outfit because she had no references, and also like she couldn't find mismatching fabrics that would look good together. However, both pieces are pretty accurate to the 1930s silhouette, and the skirt print was inspired by Sonia Delaunay, an artist and textile designer of the time period. If anything, I would say that the separates are pretty flimsy and wouldn't be able to adequately cover her undergarments if she was wearing all the correct ones, which she isn't. So the green dress also has 1930s energy, but it's definitely not accurate. The spaghetti strap situation and super high thigh slit would be way too sexy for the times. The laser cutting detail on the bodice is not period accurate either. For style, I'm giving her a 10 out of 10. She looks stunning in the green dress, and this may be one of the most iconic dresses in film history. I've talked to so many people about this movie, people who've only seen this movie one time in their lives, and the green dress is always something that they mention. Granted, I do surround myself with fashionable people, but you get my point. It's a memorable dress. I love the color, and the silhouette looks especially good on Keira's body type. Joe Wright wanted her to look ethereal, and indeed she does. Honestly, it's this green dress that carries the whole movie. And this bathing suit is quite nice as well. So I'm going to give the Duchess a 10 out of 10 on historical accuracy. This may sound a little bit crazy, but I'm not like one of those teachers who believes in not giving A pluses to their students because it's
impossible for someone to do a perfect job
or whatever. Don't get me wrong, the Duchess is far from a perfect job, but they managed to recreate costumes from 300 years ago. They're not able to just go to an antique shop and buy some costume pieces. They actually have to recreate them, and they also have to recreate them in a way that allows actors to move more comfortably, as well as to reflect the director's stylistic vision. So taking all that into account, Michael O'Connor did a pretty damn good job. The most historically inaccurate element I can point out is that the clothing would not look this drab at the time, especially considering Georgiana's high rank. 18th century fashion was known to be quite ostentatious and garish compared to today's fashion. But I assume that was a purposeful choice because they wanted to match the somber tone of the movie. Directors and costume designs do this often. For instance, on the flip side, we have a movie like Marie Antoinette, which takes place during the same time period. The colors are on the other end of the spectrum and way too saturated and pastel, but that was done purposely to evoke tone. There's, I believe, 27 dresses that Keira wears in this film. I'm just going to talk about 3 that stood out to me. She's wearing a robe à la française made of silk taffeta for her wedding gown. It's mostly accurate. The skirt looks very similar to this extant gown from the late 1770s. The gown that Georgiana actually wore for her wedding did not survive, unfortunately, but it has been recorded as being a white and gold dress. The scene where she gets undressed is pretty accurate. These kinds of gowns were often pinned or basted to clothes, so Ralph Fiennes cutting her out of the dress is actually how many women got undressed, as crazy as it may seem to a modern audience. Or I guess they wouldn't be undressed by Ralph Fiennes specifically, but you get what I mean. She's wearing a panier, a stays, and a chemise underneath. If you notice, the stomacher is attached to the stays, which is accurate because oftentimes the stomacher would be pinned or stitched to the stays. The lacing for the stays is spiral laced, which is also accurate. She's not wearing any underwear and her stockings are tied with ribbon garters. This is all really very good. The maternity dress is an interesting one because we don't see too many of those come up in period dramas. Her dress looks to be similar to a robe à l'anglaise. She wears a fur stole and fur-trimmed lower sleeves. In The Duchess by Amanda Foreman, she writes that when pregnant in the 1780s, Georgiana and her friend amused themselves by experimenting with new hats and drawing patterns for dresses. Georgiana added the false front element to the dress to disguise pregnancy, showed it to her friends, and it was so well received that the false fronts were soon worn even by women who were not pregnant. I tried researching more into this false front on Google and I didn't find anything tying to Georgiana. I did find an interesting fashion trend that came up in the 1790s where women would wear belly pads as another undergarment to kind of make this shape. These were not designed for maternity wear, but there were a bunch of satirical cartoons joking about how the woman looked pregnant. I have no idea if this is Georgiana's doing, but considering how it took some time for trends to catch on, it could be believable. Don't quote me on that though. According to O'Connor, he designed this dress to reflect Georgiana's role in campaigning for Fox's election. Just some background information, Charles Fox was one of the Whig Party leaders and he invited Georgiana to attend a campaign rally. At the time, women were rarely involved in politics, so the press ate this up, and you can find some silly political cartoons about Fox and Georgiana if you Google. The colors of the Whig Party are blue and orange, so she's wearing those colors. She's also wearing fox fur and donning foxtails in her hair as a way to fashionably show support for Fox. The fox gown is a riding habit, aka women's horseback riding attire. Its design looks to be based off of this portrait of Seymour Fleming. I love the military look of it. Even though the film doesn't do a deep dive on Georgiana's political involvement, this costume does send a nod to it. We hate to see it, but men have historically been, and honestly still are, the main players when it comes to political involvement. So when a woman wears masculine clothing, it does have these symbolic undertones. I would give the style for this movie an 8 out of 10. Honestly, it's just because, as I said before with Elizabeth Swann, I do have like a high expectation when it comes to 18th century clothing. So basically when I'm watching an 18th century period piece, unless it's like focused on the lower classes, I expect a lot of opulence and decadence and color and, you know, extravagance, the kind that gets aristocrats. O'Connor did say that they opted for simpler styles because they didn't want the costumes to be too distracting from the actual plot and dialogue, because this movie is more of like an intimate drama. I understand, but to put it simply, for eye candy purposes, the Duchess is no Marie Antoinette. Okay, I didn't like this movie, but I will say that the costumes are pretty accurate. What they got right are Keira's pompadour hairstyle, the high neck shirtwaist, walking skirts, and Edwardian lingerie dresses. Lingerie dresses, despite the name, are not actually undergarments. The reason they're called lingerie dresses is because they're made out of fabrics that are very soft and delicate and fine. So I actually did a quick Google search on Sabina Spillrain, which is Keira Knightley's character in the movie, and the real Sabina actually came from a very wealthy family. So imagine my disappointment when I saw that she was wearing the most underwhelming clothing. Maybe Sabina wasn't into fashion. Like, not all women were into fashion and clothes and looking nice, but why not make her? At least for the audience's pleasure, at least for my pleasure. This movie is not 100% historically accurate, so costume design, why can't we run with it a little bit more? Or at least have a couple fashion-forward people in the background. Higher class women loved wearing foreign imported textiles. All the way to was honestly just so boring. If this movie has the budget to hire Keira Knightley and Michael Fassbender, where's the costuming budget? I'm giving the outfits a 6 out of 10. They're not ugly, they're just not memorable. There is one scene though that I have to call out, which is why I give the historical accuracy a 8.5 out of 10. At some point, Sabina wears a corset without a chemise. Now, I'm not well versed in the history of sex, and I have not read any Edwardian erotica, but I assume the reason that they decided to have her wearing just a corset is because this corset has become quite a sexualized garment in modern day periods.
Behold my majestic corseted form.
I mean, I don't know what Sabina likes. Who's to say? Okay, so for Anna Karenina, I will admit that I loved the costume design. Some people might not expect that from me because I guess I've made enough historical accuracy videos for people to think that I care about that the most, but I actually don't. I take costume design as a whole, and I really enjoyed the costumes in this movie. But I also understand why people might not like it. I think that if you're really excited about late Victorian clothing and you kind of go into this movie thinking that you're going to see all these beautifully extravagant, opulent Victorian dresses, you're going to be disappointed because you're going to get Dior. Jacqueline Duran did the costume design for this movie, and Joe Wright is also the director for this movie, and she said that Joe actually told her that he wanted her to incorporate 1950s couture elements into this movie. For her vinyl designs, she admits that she overemphasized the 1950s couture element because she wanted to show that this was very anachronistic and that the costumes were done like this on purpose. With all that said, it should be clear that none of Anna's dresses are historically accurate. I would give the final score for that a 2 out of 10. But let's examine the underwear first. She's wearing a chemise in the opening scene, a corset, and drawers. The chemise looks to be an evening chemise, which was designed to accommodate low-shoulder dresses. However, it doesn't really make sense because she's about to put on a long-sleeved bodice. She puts on a cage crinoline, which I thought was kind of odd because the crinoline kind of peaked in popularity in the 1850s and 1860s. By the late 1860s, the crinoline was replaced by the bustle as skirts started to narrow. She also puts on a flounced petticoat over the crinoline. I would actually expect her to wear way more petticoats because of the Russian winter. The outfit she wears when she meets Vronsky is a cape decorated with a peacock feather pattern over a purple dress. Duran said they used an example of a cape from the Victoria and Albert Museum as a reference. I couldn't find that reference, but I trust her. Anna's also wearing a peacock feather in her hat and a fur stole. This is very interesting narratively because a peacock feather is actually bad luck in a lot of cultures. There are many origin stories for this, but in parts of Eastern Europe, peacock feathers are symbols of bad luck because they were allegedly worn by Mongols who invaded in the 13th century. Overall, I love this look. I think it's very elegant. I like that Keira wears some fur-trimmed outfits to reflect her environment. I also just love how this is a scene where she meets Vronsky and how she's covered in these bad luck motifs to imply to the audience that Vronsky will bring her demise. Anna Karenina also wears a black ball gown, which is pretty significant because that was a detail that translated from the original book. There is a whole passage describing the gown, which I have included here. Anna was not in lilac, as Kitty had so urgently wished, but in a black low-cut velvet gown, showing her full throat and shoulders. The whole gown was trimmed with Venetian guipure. Round her well-cut, strong neck was a thread of pearls. For this dress, Duran used Balenciaga and Dior asymmetrical bodices for the reference and an 1870s-esque transitional bustle crinoline silhouette for the skirt. Keira is also wearing a statement Chanel necklace with a camellia motif instead of a string of pearls, though she does wear pearls at other points in the film. When asked about the red dress, Duran says she chose not to bone the bodice or have Keira wear a corset to allow her ease of movement. I assume this is the same case with the black ball gown because she does a whole dance number in it. Also speaking on this point a little bit more, Russian gowns of the time period, well, trendy ones, tended to mix light fabrics such as tulle and chiffon with heavy fabrics such as velvet or brocade. Obviously, because Keira is dancing and twirling around in much of the movie, it's impractical for her to be wearing any heavy fabric. This black ball gown is made of tulle and taffeta, though to Duran's credit, they were still popular fabric choices of the era. This is the most recent period piece that I'm going to be including in this set, and I was actually debating between The Imitation Game or The Edge of Love because both of them take place around the same time period. I actually hadn't seen either before I decided to do this video idea, and when I looked at The Edge of Love, it actually had pretty flop reviews. So I decided on The Imitation Game, and hopefully more of you have seen it because it is more recent and I think it was up for some Oscar noms, not that the Oscars really means anything. So for some background, costume designer Sammy Sheldon Differ said that for this movie, it was a mixture of clothes that she had created for the movie and clothes that she either rented or bought that were original 1940s pieces. She also said that when constructing the characters' wardrobes, she tried to give each of them a very limited wardrobe to reflect the wartime rations that were happening in Great Britain at the time. For historical accuracy, Keira's costumes are pretty good. She wears some button-down collared blouses, light cardigan sweaters, and A-line skirts that were popular during the decade. I give the costumes a 10 out of 10 because there's nothing glaringly wrong. I think in general, it's pretty difficult to mess up 20th century costuming. I think if you do, then it's really like you just didn't do any research because there is just so much information out there. There's so many garments still in good condition from this time period. There really is no excuse. As for style, I can't say I'm a huge fan just because the 1940s isn't my particular cup of tea. The 1940s look is very utilitarian and boxy. That's not to say that the 1940s can't be glamorous, but Sheldon Differ said she didn't want to make Keira's character, Joan, look like a fashion icon. So we're definitely not going to see any of the more stylish garments of the decade in this movie. Sheldon Differ also purposely made it so every outfit had something mismatching, but this makes sense. For that time period, most women, and especially working women like Joan, would only own one coat and one or two hats that they would rotate between. I know 40s and 50s fashion catalogs show off these twin set hats and coats, but that just wasn't the reality of most women. I liked a few pieces that Joan wears, like this cardigan, and actually her dress at the end is quite nice. I would not personally wear either of those pieces, but they look fine. The colors she wears are mostly saturated blues and burgundies, which are colors you won't find in my closet, so I'm a little biased. I'm giving her style overall a 4 out of 10, though I do think that the outfits do a good job in conveying Joan's character. To create her designs, costume designer Andrea Fletch said that she spent a whole year sourcing original garments because she wanted to stay true to the fabrics and colors of the time period. Many of the costumes were real antique garments that were restored by the Museum of Applied Arts in Hungary. For instance, the yellow dress she wears at the beginning of the movie is a dress flesh found in an antique shop in the US. All of this is 10 out of 10 worthy. Obviously, if you're working with the original garments, they are going to reflect the time period very well. We could also see how fashion evolved over the 20-year period in this movie. Keira's character Colette wears day dresses with high necklines, long sleeves, and A-line skirts for the 1890s portion. I think it was a cheeky touch to have her wear this dress to an evening party in Paris because evening dresses of the time tended to bare the chest and shoulders. You can see how she looks out of place while still being historically accurate. I also think this is a more admirable route than going the easy costume route, which is to put the character that you want to stand out in very anachronistic clothing. It's a lot more effort and just a lot better when you're able to make the character stand out in a historically accurate way. She also wears a lot of shirtwaist dresses and blouses with flared sleeves, walking skirts, vests, and short jackets as the series progresses through the early 1900s. We can also see Keira wearing very similar clothes to what the actual Colette was photographed wearing in her life. As for details that are not so accurate, Keira does not wear a corset in the entire movie. Both Keira and the director Wash Westmoreland said they wanted to forego the corset because they wanted to emphasize how Colette was breaking gender norms and, one of those radical, rebellious women. But in reality, Colette did wear corsets. It's just very tiring for me to see the justification for the no corset versus corset dilemma because the number one reason that directors say, oh, we wanted to get rid of the corset is because they want to cater to modern audiences' idea of what a corset represents, aka female oppression or whatever. I wouldn't be such a stickler for the corset if the directors were like, oh, it just didn't make sense for the movement for the actor during the scene, or, some kind of practical excuse and not just because of this misconception of what corsets are.
I can't breathe.
Yes, I'm a bit nervous myself.
For historical accuracy, I give the looks a 9 out of 10. I really loved all the outfits in this period drama. I would give the style a 10 out of 10. I think in a lot of period pieces, costume designers are kind of afraid to give their characters neutral clothing because they're afraid of the costumes skewing on boring. But I think because of Colette's character and how she's able to mix and match menswear and women's wear, she can have a whole closet of neutrals and every look is still fresh and innovative. I love the flowy white blouses with cravats and vests. I also think she looks very good in her feminine dresses as well, but the androgynous outfits were definitely more of a statement. You just don't see too many female characters wearing menswear seriously. A lot of the times it's because the female character is in disguise or something, so she's wearing these ill-fitting men's clothes and it's just not a look. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a favorite costume that Keira Knightley wears, please let me know. If you just want to tell me what your favorite period drama that Keira has been in, please let me know that as well. I'll see you guys in my next video. I hope you have a great day and take care of yourselves.